My mother pointed at me and screamed, "You can raise your little brother. I already gave up everything for you." I held up the recording and fired back, "Play it for everyone. Tell them why you said I was only born to sacrifice." She said it in front of my aunt, my grandmother, and my little brother. My mother had spent the whole afternoon acting like this was a reasonable plan. She wanted me to quit my job rotation, skip my scheduled interview, and take over raising my brother because she had somewhere to be, and apparently I was the easiest solution. I wish I could say I stayed calm because I was some kind of saint. The truth is I stayed calm because by then I had already started recording her. I had learned the hard way that my mother could rewrite a conversation faster than she could finish one. If I wanted the truth to survive, I had to keep it somewhere she could not touch. At that point, I was 28 years old, working full-time at a distribution center outside Columbus, and still somehow getting treated like a backup parent in my own childhood home. My brother Mateo was 12 and tired in a way no 12-year-old should be. My mother Denise had been leaning on me so hard for so long that I stopped noticing how much of my life had been bent around her needs. I thought that was normal for years. I thought that was family. It was not. It took me way too long to understand that my mother did not just ask for help. She built her life around my obedience and called it sacrifice. The worst part is that I used to believe her. When I was a kid, she would say things like she gave up everything for me. She said she left school because she had me at 19. She said she passed on jobs, parties, relationships, and chances at a real life because she was raising me alone. I remember feeling guilty before I even understood what guilt really was. I remember deciding at maybe 10 years old that I had to be a good son or I would ruin her life. That idea stayed in my head for years. Then Mateo was born when I was 15, and the pressure got heavier in a way I did not know how to name. I was old enough to see what was happening, but not old enough to stop it. My mother called it stepping up. I called it being trapped, but only in my head. Out loud, I did what she asked. I changed diapers when I was home from school. I made bottles. I picked up medicine. I watched Mateo so she could work late, then so she could go out, then so she could recover from going out. By the time I was 17, I was the one school called when Mateo missed appointments she forgot about. By the time I was 18, I was paying part of the groceries because she said the house would fall apart without me. By the time I was 19, she had turned me into the second adult in the house and still acted like I owed her for letting me exist. I did not see how bad it was until I moved out for community college and started hearing myself breathe more easily. That only lasted one semester. My mother called constantly. She said Mateo needed me. She said the bills were too much. She said she could not do it alone. I came back home. I told myself it was temporary. It never is. I picked up the extra shifts. I drove Mateo to school when she slept through alarms. I covered the electric bill once, then twice, then so many times that I stopped counting. Every time I tried to make my own plan, she had a crisis waiting. It was always something with her. Never her fault. Never her responsibility. Just life being unfair and me being the only person who could help. That was how she talked to me right up until the afternoon she screamed that I could raise my little brother. The day started ordinary enough, which is probably why it hit me so hard. I had a late interview for a supervisor position at the warehouse, the first real shot at getting out of my dead-end schedule. I had spent the night before ironing the only decent shirt I owned and printing copies of my resume. I even wrote down a few notes in the car because I was nervous and did not want to ramble. I left those notes on the kitchen table because I was rushing out the door. That turned out to be a mistake, since my mother used my paperwork as evidence that I was somehow abandoning the family by improving my life. She had already been annoyed all morning because Mateo had a field trip and she had forgotten to sign the permission slip. Again, the school called before noon. She did not answer. I answered from work because the office line showed up on my phone while I was in the middle of counting pallets. The secretary was polite but tired. She told me they needed a form by the end of the day or Mateo could not go on the trip. I asked if they had already contacted Denise. They had. 3 times, I texted my mother and told her to handle it. She responded an hour later with a message that said she was busy and I could take care of it since I was home at lunch more than she was. I was not home at lunch. I had not been home at lunch in years. Still, I drove to the school on my break, signed the form, and left it in the office. That should have been the end of it. It was not. When I got home around 6, my mother was in the living room with her purse open and her phone in her hand like she had been waiting to perform. Mateo was on the couch with his hoodie pulled over his head. My Aunt Rosa was at the kitchen table with my grandmother, and that alone told me something was wrong. My family did not gather unless somebody was lying, sick, or broke, usually all 3. I asked what was going on, and my mother immediately started talking like she had rehearsed a speech. She said she had an opportunity to go out of town for a few days. She said it was important. She said she had already arranged most of it. Then she said the part that made my stomach drop. She said Mateo would stay with me while she took care of things. I asked how long a few days meant. She said maybe a week, maybe longer. I told her no. It came out calm enough that even I was surprised. I said I had my interview the next morning. I said I had already taken time off for Mateo's school trip. I said I could not disappear from work for a week because she had a spontaneous plan. She looked at me like I had insulted her. Then she told me that she had been taking care of everyone for almost 3 decades and I could do this one thing without acting like a victim. I asked who was going with her. She said that was none of my business. That should have been the moment I backed out and left. I did not. I stood there too long looking at her face, trying to understand why she had the look of someone who had decided my life belonged to her. Then she said it again, louder this time, saying I could raise my little brother because she had already given up everything for me. That line hit me in a way I still have trouble describing. It was so familiar that I almost accepted it before I even thought about it. That was the problem with my mother. She did not just manipulate. She repeated the same emotional script so often that it became the background noise of my life. But this time, I had a recording running on my phone. I had started recording her a few months earlier after a phone call where she denied telling me Mateo could stay with my aunt for spring break. I had backed out of the driveway, realized she was already rewriting the conversation, and hit record on instinct. After that, I started doing it more often. Not every time, just enough to prove I was not losing my mind. The recording I had that day was from the call she made earlier that week to my Aunt Rosa. I had not meant to catch it. My phone was in my pocket. I was washing dishes. My mother was on speaker in the kitchen and did not realize I was close enough to hear the whole thing. She had told Rosa that I was the one who needed to step up because I was the oldest and because Mateo was my responsibility now. She had said I was only born so she would not have to be alone. She had said I needed to understand that mothers sacrifice and sons repay. She had said, in almost exactly those words, that I was only born to sacrifice. When she screamed at me in front of everybody, I finally held up the phone and told her to play it for everyone if she wanted. I told her to explain why she had said I was only born to sacrifice. The room went still in the way a room only does when people realize the person they have been listening to might be the liar. My mother's face changed first, then my grandmother's, then my aunt's. Mateo looked confused more than anything else. That was the part that hurt the most. He was old enough to understand tone, but not old enough to fully understand manipulation. He just knew that adults were suddenly angry and he was trapped in the middle of it again. My mother told me to delete whatever I thought I had. I said no. I told her she had spent years telling me I misheard her, misremembered her, and misunderstood her, so I had decided to start keeping receipts. I did not yell. I did not throw anything. I just put the phone on the table and let the room listen. The recording was not long. It did not need to be. My mother's voice came through sharp and impatient, talking to Rosa about how I had become too independent and how she needed me to remember my place. She said Mateo needed stability. She said I owed her because she had never walked away. She said she had missed every normal part of life because of me. Then she said the part that made my grandmother cover her mouth with one hand. She said I was only here because she had given up her own future, and that if I really loved my family, I would stop acting like a son and start acting like help. Nobody spoke for a long moment after that. My mother looked at Rosa like she expected betrayal. Rosa looked at my grandmother like she was trying to decide how much had been hidden from the family for years. My grandmother, who had defended my mother for decades, looked at me with a kind of shock I had never seen from her before. I think that was the first time she understood this was not just me being difficult. It was easier for everyone in my family to think I had become stubborn than to admit my mother had been training me to be useful instead of loved. My mother tried to get ahead of it immediately. She said I had edited the audio. She said I was trying to make her look bad because I did not want responsibility. She said I always twisted her words when things did not go my way. That was when I pulled out the folder I had started keeping in my glove compartment. I did not even know I looked prepared until that moment. Inside were printed copies of texts, screenshots of school emails, bank transfer records, and notes I had made over the past several months. I had not planned to use them in one dramatic reveal. I had just gotten tired of forgetting things she insisted never happened. The first sheet was a text from the school saying Mateo had missed 2 appointments with the counselor. My mother had told me those appointments did not matter. The next was a message from the pharmacy saying his inhaler prescription had not been picked up on time. She had said she would take care of it. The next was a screenshot of a transfer I had made to cover groceries after she told me the account was short. The transfer was to her account, not the grocery store. That was the first time I had noticed her pattern clearly enough to write it down. She asked for help in vague language and spent the money on whatever she wanted. If I questioned it, she got offended. If I asked for receipts, she accused me of thinking she was stealing. That had always been enough to make me back off, until it was not. I laid the papers out one by one. I showed the text where she told me she was busy and I should deal with Mateo's school trip. I showed the email from his attendance office asking for a parent meeting. I showed the bank record for the money I had sent her for school clothes that somehow became a new set of tires for her car. I showed the late notice from the electric company that she had hidden on the fridge behind a takeout menu. My grandmother started reading without saying anything. Rosa kept looking from one page to another. My mother's voice got tighter with every page. She said I was keeping score. I told her no, I was keeping records. There is a difference. What I did not say out loud, because I was still trying to be fair, was that I had not started this folder to attack her. I had started it because I was scared. I was scared that I was turning into the kind of person who forgot what happened after every argument. I was scared that Mateo was growing up in the same fog I had lived in. I was scared that if something happened to my mother, everyone would expect me to absorb the whole mess without ever being asked. That is what she had always done. She made her chaos feel like inheritance. The thing I had not expected was Mateo speaking up. He did not do it dramatically. He just said, in the small voice he always got when he thought he might be in trouble, that he had been getting himself ready for school most mornings for weeks because Mom slept through her alarms. He said he had eaten cereal for dinner a lot. He said he had stopped asking about field trip money because every time he asked, she got mad. He said he liked when I came home because the house felt less weird. That almost broke me more than the yelling did. I had spent so long being the older brother that I forgot Mateo had been watching all of it. I had been so focused on surviving my mother that I missed how much of that survival had become normal to him. My mother told him to stop talking. He shut down immediately. That was another thing she was very good at. She could switch from wounded to commanding in one breath and make everyone in the room feel guilty for watching. But Rosa had heard enough. She asked my mother what the trip was really for. My mother said it was not her concern. Rosa said it became her concern when my mother started trying to leave a 12-year-old with a brother who had not agreed to be a parent. That question changed the temperature in the room. My mother hesitated. She never hesitated unless the truth was expensive. Then she admitted the trip was to meet a man she had been seeing in another city. That part should not have shocked me, but it did, not because she was dating. I did not care about that. It was because she had already packed a suitcase and was planning to disappear for almost a week while telling everyone she had an urgent work thing. She was going to leave Mateo with me, then leave me to figure out the rest. That was the moment I finally understood the trip was never just a trip. It was an exit plan. She had been testing whether I would absorb the fallout before she actually walked away. I asked how long she had been planning it. She said long enough to know I would overreact. That sentence told me everything I needed to know. In her mind, the problem was never what she did. It was my reaction to it. That was how she kept control for years. I was always the emotional one if I objected. She was always the practical one if she demanded something impossible. My aunt was the first person to say what I had been too afraid to say. She asked my mother whether she had really been planning to hand Mateo over permanently. My mother denied that immediately, but not convincingly. Then Rosa mentioned the call, the one I had recorded, the one where my mother had already started talking like this had been decided. That is when I saw her realize she had lost track of what she had told whom. She was used to juggling versions of the truth separately. She did not expect them to collide in the same room. That is the real danger with people like her. They think their power comes from being louder. It does not. It comes from keeping everybody apart. The minute they are forced into the same room, the whole structure starts to wobble. My grandmother asked to hear the recording again. I played it again. This time, nobody interrupted. When it ended, my mother looked directly at me and said I was betraying her after everything she had done. I did not answer that with anger. I asked her very quietly when she had last gone to one of Mateo's doctor appointments. She said Rosa was not here to interrogate her. I asked again. She said it did not matter because I was there. That answer, more than anything, made my grandmother's face change because it exposed the whole ugly center of it. My mother had not been managing us. She had been outsourcing us. The reason she had always sounded so tired was because she was never doing the actual work. She was doing the talking. I was doing the work. Mateo was doing the adapting. Rosa was doing the emergency patches when she felt guilty enough. My grandmother was doing the defending. My mother was doing the taking. Once you see that pattern clearly, you cannot unsee it. Rosa asked me if I had ever gotten any money from Mateo's father. That question came out of nowhere, and for a second I did not understand why she was asking. Then my mother's face went blank. That was when I knew there was something else, something she had not wanted anyone to look at. I told Rosa I did not even know who Mateo's father really was until I was older. My mother had given different stories over the years. One guy had moved away. One had disappeared. One had supposedly died. I had long ago stopped asking because every answer came with more drama than information. Rosa stood up, walked to the counter, and came back with an envelope my mother had left sitting near the microwave. I had not even noticed it. That was probably why she had not destroyed it. It looked like junk mail. It was not. Inside was a notice from the county child support office. The father had been sending money, not consistently, but enough that the account should have mattered. The notice said the payments were being reviewed because there was evidence the child's primary caregiver was not meeting reporting requirements. I looked at my mother. She told me not to read too much into it. I read it twice anyway. The money was supposed to help with Mateo. The notice showed the county had flagged that the address on file had been changed more than once and that some of the mail had come back unopened. In other words, my mother had not just been hiding bills. She had been hiding official paperwork too. That changed everything. If child support was going through and she was still constantly telling me there was no money, then she had been lying for years. Not just exaggerating, not just stressing. Lying. That was the point where I felt my anger go cold. I think people imagine anger as loud. Mine was quiet. It was a kind of terrible clarity. I suddenly understood that I had spent so much energy trying to be fair to my mother that I had never stopped to ask whether fairness had ever been her goal. She had been building a life where she could always point at my guilt and use it as leverage. Once I saw that, every weird memory I had started lining up behind it. The time she suddenly needed money right after I got a raise. The time she claimed she forgot to tell me about Mateo's needs until the last possible second. The time she acted offended when I asked for receipts. The time she said I was selfish for wanting a day off. The time she told relatives I was moody, difficult, and ungrateful when really I was exhausted. She had been shaping the story of me for years because the story was what kept people on her side. My grandmother finally asked the question that mattered. She asked my mother what she intended to do with Mateo if I said no. My mother said she had not planned that far ahead. Nobody believed her. Even Mateo looked disappointed by that answer. I said I would help my brother. I told them all that clearly. I said Mateo could stay with me for the night if needed while they sorted out a plan. I said I was not abandoning him. But I also said I was not his parent, and I was done being forced into a role I never agreed to. My mother started crying then, not the sincere kind, the kind that arrives once manipulation stops working. She told everyone she had sacrificed her whole life for me. She said I would be nowhere without her. She said she had worked herself to the bone so I could have a roof over my head. I almost laughed, which would have made me look cruel, so I did not. Instead, I asked her whose name was on the lease. That stopped her. She said the lease was not the point. I said it was exactly the point. I had been paying half of it for years. I had the transfer records to prove it. The apartment was in her name, but I had been keeping it afloat every month since I was 23. That was another thing she had always conveniently omitted when retelling our history. She liked to describe herself as the sole provider. That story fell apart the second anyone checked the bank app. Rosa asked to see the lease. My mother said no. I said I had a copy in my email because I had signed it as a co-resident when she refinanced the place after her credit got bad. That was a fun little fact she had also buried. I had not realized what it meant at the time. I had just wanted a stable place for Mateo. Now I understood it had been another way to tie me to her. The more I thought about it, the more humiliating it felt. She had made me think I was helping family. In reality, I had been collateral. The phone on the table buzzed. It was an unknown number. I answered because I was already in the middle of a mess and could not imagine it getting worse. It was the school counselor. She said Mateo had recently mentioned not always having an adult home after school. She said they had tried calling Denise several times and could not get a reliable response. She said they were concerned enough that they were documenting it. I looked at my mother while she insisted with her face that I was the one causing problems. Then I handed the phone to Rosa. That was the first concrete moment when I stopped managing my mother's image. I let someone else hear the real version. Rosa spoke to the counselor for a few minutes. By the end of it, the counselor had enough concern to request a meeting the next morning with whoever was actually available to care for Mateo. My mother tried to interrupt. Rosa held up a hand and told her to sit down. I have never seen my mother obey anyone willingly before, and she did not then either, but for once she had no useful move left. The counselor said they would need a safe temporary plan. Rosa said Mateo could stay with her. My grandmother immediately agreed. My mother objected. She said Mateo belonged with her. That sentence sounded ridiculous the second it left her mouth. He had spent most of the year with me anyway. He belonged with no one. He was a person, not a possession. The counselor asked if there had ever been physical abuse. Nobody answered immediately. That is because people think abuse has to look like bruises to count. Sometimes it looks like a child who knows better than to ask for lunch money. Sometimes it looks like a teenager making his own appointments. Sometimes it looks like a grown man sitting at a family table and realizing he was trained to be grateful for neglect. I said there was no physical violence that I had seen. I also said that Mateo had been left alone more times than I was comfortable with. That was enough for the counselor to say they would document it. My mother stared at me like I had stabbed her. I had not. I had just stopped covering for her. Those are not the same thing, but to a person like Denise, they probably feel identical. The evening that followed was one of the strangest of my life. There was no single cinematic explosion. There was just a series of smaller collapses. My mother tried one story, then another, then another. First I was overreacting, then I was misrepresenting, then I was tired, then I was bitter because of work. Then Rosa was turning against her, then my grandmother was being manipulated, then Mateo was too young to understand. Each defense contradicted the last one. By the time she ran out of excuses, the room had already moved on without her. Rosa asked to see the rest of the folder I had brought. I gave her everything. The saved texts, the rent transfers, the photo of the shut-off notice she had shoved behind a stack of coupons, the email from my manager showing I had been denied time off twice because I kept using my vacation days to cover her emergencies, the copies of Mateo's school forms, the doctor appointment reminders, even the notebook where I had written down dates because I was afraid she would later insist they never happened. Rosa kept shaking her head as she looked through it. My grandmother cried quietly, which made the whole thing feel real in a way the yelling never did. Real life is always quieter than people expect when it finally falls apart. Nobody was throwing plates. Nobody was smashing windows. It was just paperwork and bad memories and the slow sound of a family realizing the person they had protected had been using them. My mother suddenly tried a different angle. She said I was angry because she had not funded my life the way she should have. That was almost funny. I had spent years funding hers. I told her I did not need her money. I had a job. I had been supporting myself and Mateo whenever she dropped the ball. I said the only thing I wanted from her now was honesty. She could not give that to me. That was the core of everything, not the screaming, not the money, not even Mateo. It was that she had taught me to live in a house where reality depended on her mood. That is not a home. That is a hostage situation with nicer furniture. Rosa asked me what I wanted to do next. I told her I wanted Mateo safe tonight. I wanted my own key back from my mother because she had never respected my privacy. And I was tired of worrying about her going through my room. I wanted my mail forwarded to a P.O. box I had set up 2 weeks earlier after I got suspicious about missing bills. I wanted to keep my job interview, and I wanted to stop being treated like a backup parent because my mother could not handle her own life. Nobody argued with any of that, not even my grandmother. That mattered to me more than I expected, because for the first time I was not asking permission to be separate. I was stating boundaries and watching them be accepted by people who had once taught me not to have any. My mother saw the room slipping away and made one last attempt to pull Mateo back onto her side. She told him she loved him. He looked at the floor and said he knew. That tiny answer destroyed more of her power than anything I had said all night. Because love is not supposed to be something you weaponize whenever someone sets a boundary. Love is not supposed to require obedience. Love is not supposed to disappear when a person says no. My mother had used the word love like a coupon she expected to be accepted everywhere. That night, nobody took it. Rosa took Mateo to her house before 10. My grandmother insisted he bring a bag. I helped him pack because he looked so lost that I could not stand it. I put in his school clothes, his charger, his earbuds, the dinosaur hoodie he liked, and the homework folder he had been avoiding. He asked me if Mom was mad at him. I told him she was mad at me. That was safer and also true enough. He asked if he had to stay away forever. I told him no. I told him he was welcome at Rosa's and he would still see me and none of this was his fault. He nodded like he understood, but I could see he did not fully. Kids rarely understand adult damage in real time. They just learn the weather. After he left, the house felt wrong in a way I had never noticed before. For years I had assumed the constant tension was just life. Without Mateo there, the silence was almost violent. My mother stayed in the kitchen with her arms folded and did not speak to me. I did not speak to her either. I found my own copy of the lease, the one with my signature on it, and my own stack of receipts. I put them in a folder and took them to my car. Then I came back inside and locked my bedroom door for the first time in years. The next morning I went to my interview. I almost did not sleep. I kept expecting my mother to show up at the warehouse and create some disaster before I got there. She did not. I suspect it is because Rosa had already told her exactly how bad that would look. The interview went better than I expected because I had actually prepared for it. I answered the questions cleanly. I talked about inventory flow, staffing issues, and how I handled late shipments. I did not ramble. I did not apologize for existing. A week later, I got the job. It came with better pay, steadier hours, and a shot at getting out of the role my mother had been using as evidence that I was still available to rescue her life. When I got the email, I sat in my car for almost 10 minutes just staring at it. I think I was waiting to feel more triumphant. Mostly I felt tired, then relieved, then guilty because I still felt guilty even after doing the right thing. That part took longer to fade than I wanted. In the meantime, the school meeting happened. Rosa went with Mateo. I went on my lunch break. The counselor was professional and kind, which honestly made me feel worse because it reminded me how far off track things had gotten. The school documented the missed appointments and the repeated absence of a reliable adult. Rosa agreed to temporary care for Mateo while the family figured out what to do. My mother showed up late and angry. She said everyone was overreacting. The counselor, who had probably seen this exact thing 100 times, remained calm and asked practical questions. That was when Denise lost control of the room completely, because people like her are dangerous when they can dominate the emotional temperature. They are much weaker when somebody refuses to get loud back. The counselor kept asking for facts: who had been responsible for pickups, who had signed forms, who had attended appointments, who had actual access to the child's records. That kind of question is poison to a story built on vague sacrifice. The answers did not help my mother. Then the county worker came by phone later in the day and asked about the child support review. That was the detail that sealed it for me. My mother had not just been careless. She had been hiding money and paperwork while telling everyone there was no other option. The worker said the office had already flagged inconsistent reporting and would be following up. I was not present for the whole call, but Rosa filled me in afterward. Apparently, my mother got quieter after that, not because she admitted anything, because she realized there were systems now and systems were harder to charm than family. That turned out to be the real turning point, not the recording, not the screaming, the fact that official records existed outside her influence. Receipts, texts, school logs, county notices, bank transfers, a lease, a folder full of boring paper that turned out to be more powerful than years of guilt. Once the paper trail existed, her version of events stopped being enough. A couple of days later, she tried to call me like nothing had happened. I let it ring. She texted me a long message about how families make mistakes and how I was ruining things over pride. I did not answer. Then she sent another one saying Mateo missed me. That one hit, because of course it did. That was her favorite tactic. She always used Mateo when she wanted me to soften. I did not reply to that either. I asked Rosa to keep me updated on him instead. That was the first time in my adult life I made a decision involving my brother without checking with my mother first. It felt wrong. It also felt incredible. I started going to Mateo's soccer games on my own schedule. I helped with homework when I wanted to, not because I had been trapped into it. I took him to get tacos after school one Friday. He talked the whole ride about a video game and a math project and whether our aunt's dog hated him. It was such a normal conversation that I almost cried in the parking lot. That was when I realized how much of my life had been spent in crisis mode. Normal felt foreign. Then it started feeling precious. My mother did not disappear from our lives. That would have been too neat. She got angry, then defensive, then performatively hurt. She told relatives I had turned the family against her. Some of them believed her for a while. A few of them always will. That is another ugly truth about families. Some people prefer a familiar liar to an inconvenient truth. But once the school got involved and Rosa had the counselor's notes and I had the recordings and receipts, the room around my mother got smaller. She lost the ability to tell one story to me, another to Rosa, another to the school, and another to the county without those versions crashing into each other. That was the whole trick, not revenge. Exposure. Eventually she had to deal with the practical fallout. She had to explain missed appointments. She had to answer questions about the benefit paperwork. She had to acknowledge that Mateo was staying with Rosa for the time being. She did not like any of it. I did not need her to like it. I needed it to be true. A month after everything blew up, I moved into a small apartment closer to my new job. It was nothing fancy. 2 rooms, thin walls, a stove that took too long to heat up, and a window that faced a parking lot. It was mine, though. That mattered more than the size. The first night I slept there, I woke up twice because the silence felt too open. I kept waiting for footsteps, a slammed cabinet, a demand, a crisis. Nothing happened. Eventually, I fell back asleep and stayed there until morning. I do not think I had slept that peacefully in years. Mateo visited the next weekend. Rosa brought him over and stayed for coffee. He was awkward at first, which made sense. He looked around the apartment like he was trying to figure out whether adults were allowed to have spaces this calm. I made him breakfast and let him pick the playlist. We played cards on the floor and ate cereal straight from the box. At one point, he asked me if I was still mad at Mom. I told him I was not trying to punish her. I told him I was trying to live in a way that did not make me disappear. He nodded slowly, like that made some kind of sense. Kids understand more than we think they do when you stop talking to them like they are furniture. He asked if I had really recorded Mom. I said yes. He asked why. I told him because she kept changing the story and I wanted to know I was not crazy. He looked at me for a second and then said he was glad I did. That almost got me, not because he was choosing sides, because he sounded relieved that the truth had somewhere to land. That is what the recording became for me. Not a weapon, a place for truth to land. The biggest change was not that my mother lost control of me. It was that I stopped believing her guilt was my job to manage. For years I thought being a good son meant absorbing everything. Her stress, her mess, her regrets, her silence, her rewriting of the past. I thought if I was patient enough, she would eventually recognize what I had done and meet me halfway. She never did. People like her do not meet you halfway. They keep moving the line and acting surprised when you cannot keep up. Once I understood that, I stopped negotiating against myself. I kept the recordings. I kept the receipts. I kept the boundary. My grandmother apologized to me one afternoon in a way that sounded painful for her. She said she had seen signs and made excuses. I told her I understood. I really did. Families are trained to preserve the story they already know. Sometimes that means nobody notices the abuse because it is hidden inside duty and gratitude and the word family itself. I did not blame her, not entirely. I blamed the pattern. That was new for me too. My mother still called occasionally. Sometimes she wanted money. Sometimes she wanted me to explain why everyone was being cruel to her. Sometimes she acted as if enough time had passed that I should be over it. I never answered with anger. I answered when it concerned Mateo. Everything else I let go to voicemail. That was another thing I had to learn. Silence can be a boundary instead of a surrender. About 3 months after the whole thing, Rosa told me the county had finished reviewing the child support situation and that my mother could no longer pretend the money had been flowing the way she claimed. I did not ask for every detail. I did not need them. The important part was that the paper trail had caught up to her. She could no longer act like the bills were imaginary or the child support was unimportant or Mateo's needs were mine to absorb. There were now official people in the mix. That fact alone changed how she behaved. Not kindly, just carefully. That was enough. The last big confrontation happened at my grandmother's birthday dinner. I almost did not go. I was tired of family tables feeling like courtrooms. But Mateo wanted me there, and my grandmother had been gentle with me since the fallout, so I went. My mother arrived late and immediately acted as if the last few months had been some misunderstanding everyone needed to move past. She had a new haircut. That annoyed me irrationally. It felt like she had prepared for a reset while the rest of us were still carrying the damage. Halfway through dinner, she started talking about how families should forgive each other and how people make mistakes when they are under pressure. Nobody responded. She looked at me and said I had been very cold. I told her I had been very clear. That was not the same thing. She said I had humiliated her. I said she had done that to herself. Then she said, in front of everyone, that I was still acting like the world owed me something because I had been the responsible one for so long. That line used to work on me. Not anymore. I told her being responsible and being used were not the same thing. She started to say something else, but my grandmother cut in and told her to stop. That was the first time I had ever seen my grandmother shut her down directly. The whole table went silent. Then my grandmother said she was ashamed of how long she had let Denise treat me like a spare adult. My mother looked stunned, not because she had been caught, because she had finally lost the audience she assumed would always rescue her from consequences. I did not say much after that. I did not need to. The truth had already outlived the argument. Dinner ended early. My mother left in a rage. I stayed and helped my grandmother clean up. Mateo washed plates beside me. He was humming under his breath, which meant he felt safe enough to forget about the tension for a little while. That tiny sound probably meant more to me than the entire fight. A few weeks later, I got my first real paycheck in the new job. It was not life-changing money. It just felt clean. No emergency deduction for someone else's mistake. No guilt tax. No hidden obligation. I opened a separate savings account. I started building a life that did not require me to remain on standby for my mother's chaos. I even made an appointment with a therapist, which I resisted for longer than I should have because I thought I could just logic my way out of everything. Turns out you can understand something intellectually and still need help untangling the emotional wiring. Who knew? The therapist asked me why I had stayed so long. I told her because I kept confusing loyalty with obligation. She said that was common. I said it still made me feel stupid. She said it made me human. That answer bothered me more than I expected because it was kind. My mother had never sounded kind when she wanted me to comply. Kindness from a professional felt almost suspicious. It took a while before I believed I was allowed to have boundaries without needing an emergency to justify them. Mateo adjusted faster than I did. Kids do that when adults finally become predictable. He started texting me random things, homework questions, memes, pictures of his lunch, a video of Rosa's dog stealing socks. None of it was dramatic. All of it mattered. I answered every time I could. I kept showing up without overpromising. That was important to me. I did not want to repeat my mother's habit of making grand emotional claims she could not sustain. If I said I would come, I came. If I said I would call, I called. If I could not help, I said no and did not write a guilt novel about it. That, more than anything, was the difference between what my mother called sacrifice and what I actually wanted my life to be. Sacrifice in her hands meant control. Care in mine meant honesty. The biggest relief came from realizing I did not need to win in some dramatic way. I did not need to humiliate her. I did not need her to admit every detail. I only needed the truth to be documented well enough that she could not keep using lies to force me back into position. That is exactly what happened. The recording mattered because it captured her own words. The texts mattered because they showed the pattern. The bank records mattered because they proved where the money went. The school notes mattered because Mateo's experience was not imagined. The lease mattered because I had been paying into a home I was treated like I did not own. All of it together made the manipulation too heavy to carry. When people ask me now whether I regret recording her, I say no. I regret that I needed to. I regret that it took me so long. I regret that Mateo had to live through it. But I do not regret keeping the proof. Without it, I would probably still be explaining myself in circles while my mother told everybody I was sensitive and ungrateful. With it, she lost the power to make reality whatever was convenient for her that day. That was the real victory, not revenge, not punishment, just the end of her ability to rewrite me. Mateo is 14 now. He still lives with Rosa during the week, and we see each other constantly. My mother sees him too, under boundaries and with other adults around, which is how it should have been in the first place. She hates that I do not answer her emotional traps anymore. She hates that I can stay calm while she spirals. She hates that I know how to check a document before I believe a story. I do not hate her. I am too tired for that. What I feel is closer to grief. I grieve the mother I needed and did not get. I grieve the years I spent trying to earn basic decency. I grieve the fact that Mateo and I had to learn how to become family to each other while our actual parent acted like we were burdens. But I also feel something better than grief now. I feel settled. I feel like I am standing on solid ground for the first time. The last time my mother tried to guilt me into taking over one of her responsibilities, I told her I was not available and did not explain further. That sentence used to terrify me. Now it feels like freedom, and every time I think about that night in the living room, with my aunt and grandmother and brother watching her scream that I could raise my little brother, I remember the look on her face when I played her own words back. She finally understood she was not the only one keeping score. She was just the one who thought nobody else was allowed to.